"She's just a pathetic failure, nothing like you." The words pierced through the music like shards of glass. I froze where I stood, clutching a crystal champagne flute that suddenly felt far too heavy for my 70-year-old hands. My own daughter, Ruth Taylor, had said those words about me to her wealthy mother-in-law, Pamela Miller. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Ruth's life. More than 300 guests filled the grand estate, where manicured gardens stretched endlessly under the glow of golden lights. An orchestra of 18 musicians played standards so perfectly arranged it felt as if the notes were stitched into the air itself. The flowers, the wine, the lace, everything about this wedding screamed opulence. And me? I was the mother of the bride, standing near the terrace doors in a dress I had chosen with care. It was not couture, not imported, but it was respectable, elegant enough for a woman who still wanted to feel worthy of celebration. Yet when I overheard my daughter's voice, sharp, dismissive, cruel, all that dignity crumbled. I glanced at Ruth. She stood in her couture gown, a vintage piece I had preserved for 40 years. I wore it when I married her father, Ronald. She had begged to wear it, claiming it meant something sentimental, a way to honor her father's memory. I thought it was love that tied us together in that moment. Now I realized it was convenience, another detail to elevate her image among the elite she so desperately wanted to impress. Pamela Miller leaned in close to Ruth, pearls glinting under the chandeliers. "At least she knows her place," Pamela murmured. "Some people from simpler backgrounds forget they're meant to fade quietly into the background." Simpler backgrounds. That was her phrase for my entire life. I had spent decades scrubbing, saving, sacrificing, working late shifts and stretching every dollar so Ruth could have music lessons, summer camps, and eventually the education she demanded. I gave her everything her father and I never had, and here she was, standing in luxury worth millions, dismissing me as though I were little more than a faded accessory to be stored away after the reception. My hand trembled as I set down my glass. I thought of Ronald, gone 3 years now. He would never have let this moment pass without speaking up. Ronald had always seen further than I did, always read people with sharper eyes. On the night before he died, weak, but still fiercely protective, he had pressed a sealed envelope into my hands. "If Ruth ever treats you badly," he whispered, "if she ever makes you feel small, promise me you'll read this out loud. She needs to hear what I truly thought. Promise me, Emma." I promised, and though I tucked that envelope deep into my purse for years, I never believed I would use it. Not until tonight. The ceremony earlier had been flawless. Guests wiped tears as Ruth glided down the aisle, radiant and glowing, her arm looped through Jason Taylor's. Jason came from a family whose wealth stretched back generations. His grandfather built empires in real estate. His mother, Pamela, had spent decades polishing their reputation with charity galas and museum boards. For Ruth, marrying into that family was not just love, it was conquest. I had sat 2 rows behind Pamela, my view of Ruth's smile half blocked by the hat of a distant cousin. Even then, I felt Pamela's chill. It was the kind of coldness wrapped in politeness, the sort that cuts deeper because it hides behind manners. She had always treated me like someone tolerated but never valued. But hearing Ruth agree with her, hearing my own child reduce my life to nothing, that broke something inside me. I wanted to storm forward, to shout, "I am not a failure!" But instead, I pressed my lips together and reminded myself to breathe. A woman my age knows the cost of losing composure in front of people who already think less of her. Still, Ronald's words echoed in my memory. "Promise me, Emma." I slipped a hand into my purse and brushed the edge of the envelope, its paper worn soft after years of carrying it everywhere. My late husband's handwriting was still scrawled across the front. "For Emma, only if you need it." And for the first time, I realized that tonight, this very moment, was exactly what Ronald had foreseen. As the orchestra swelled into another love song and laughter rippled through the glittering crowd, I looked at my daughter and saw not just the bride she wanted the world to admire. I saw a woman who had already calculated her climb, who had dismissed the hands that once held her steady. My jaw tightened, my heart pounded. I made a silent vow to myself. Before this night ended, Ruth and Pamela and every last guest in this gilded hall would know exactly who Emma Brown was. Not a failure, not a burden, not invisible, and certainly not someone to be discarded. When the first dance began, and all eyes turned toward Ruth and Jason, I slipped away from the glittering ballroom. My shoes tapped against the marble floor as I walked quickly down a quiet hallway, away from the laughter, away from Pamela's polished smile, away from the gnawing echo of my daughter's words. I found refuge in the mansion's library. It was a room designed to impress rather than to be used, with shelves that soared toward the ceiling, crammed with leather-bound volumes that looked as though they had never been opened. Heavy curtains muffled the music drifting in from the reception, and for the first time all day, I was alone. I sat down in an armchair that probably cost more than my car and reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the envelope I had carried for 3 years. Ronald's handwriting, shaky but unmistakable, covered the front. "For Emma, only if you need it." My throat tightened as I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper filled with his careful script. I unfolded it with trembling hands and began to read. "My dearest Emma, if you are reading this, it means Ruth has shown you who she has become, not who she once was. I am sorry, sweetheart. I know this will hurt, but I cannot leave this world without telling you what I have seen." I took a breath and continued, hearing his voice as if he were beside me. "Ruth has changed since she became close to Jason, not just happy different, but calculated different. She has been asking me about our savings, my will, and what would happen to you if I passed. She told me she worried about your future, but Emma, I do not believe worry is the right word." A chill ran through me. "Yesterday, she brought me brochures from an exclusive senior living facility. She said it was just planning ahead. But Emma, the paperwork included a waiting list application and financial transfer forms. When I asked her why she thought you needed assisted living when you were only 67, she said it was better to be prepared." I pressed the letter against my chest, my heart racing. I saw her purse yesterday, and tucked inside was the same brochure. "She is planning something. Please be careful. That is why I changed my will. Everything now goes directly to you, with legal safeguards so she cannot contest it. I wanted to protect you, Emma, because you are the best thing I ever did with my life. Do not let her convince you that you are a burden. Forever yours, Ronald." Tears blurred the words, but I forced myself to read the final line. "P.S. Do not let her put you in that place. Promise me, Emma." My hands shook as I folded the letter back into its envelope. Ronald had known. Even in his final days, fighting the cancer that stole him from me, he had seen what I could not: our daughter's hunger for security, her impatience with responsibility, her willingness to treat me as a liability rather than a mother. I stared at the rows of unread books around me, their gilded spines gleaming under the chandelier. It struck me how many of these volumes had been chosen for appearance, not for knowledge. A library as decoration, a daughter as ornament, a mother as burden. Ronald had entrusted me with his truth, and now I carried the weight of his warning. The music swelled louder as the guests clapped for the couple's spin across the floor. I dabbed at my eyes with a napkin I had stuffed into my purse earlier and steadied my breath. I could not collapse now. I thought of Ruth as a little girl, clinging to my leg when she was nervous, whispering, "Don't leave me, Mommy." I thought of the nights Ronald and I worked double shifts so we could pay for her piano lessons, her camps, her dreams. We believed giving her more than we had would make her grateful, compassionate. Instead, it had fed a hunger we never understood. I slipped the letter back into my purse and whispered into the empty room, "I promise, Ronald, I won't let her do this." When I returned to the reception, the lights seemed brighter, the music louder, the crowd more suffocating. I sat at my assigned table number 10, tucked at the edge of the room among distant relatives I barely knew. They spoke of business mergers and luxury vacations while I pushed food around my plate, my mind on the envelope in my purse. Across the room, Ruth sparkled with ease. Jason stood proudly beside her, a man who had inherited wealth rather than earned it, but who wore his privilege like a tailored suit. Pamela hovered nearby, guiding her new daughter-in-law through introductions with polished efficiency. They looked like the perfect family tableau. But I knew the truth now. Behind Ruth's dazzling smile and Pamela's pearls lay a plan to erase me from my own life. And thanks to Ronald's letter, I was armed with proof. I tightened my grip on the purse at my side and straightened my shoulders. The time was coming when I would need to speak, to reveal what Ronald had seen, to demand that Ruth see me not as a burden to be managed, but as her mother. But tonight, I would wait. Tonight, I would watch. Because once I spoke, nothing in this family would ever be the same again. The reception carried on like a grand performance, every detail staged to project perfection. From the gilded chandeliers to the champagne fountains, it was a spectacle meant to impress, and it did. Guests murmured with delight at the endless trays of hors d'oeuvres, the towering floral arrangements, and the orchestra that played with a precision few would ever hear outside a concert hall. But sitting at table 10, near the far corner of the ballroom, I felt like an extra in someone else's show. The relatives seated with me were distant connections of Jason's family, polite, polished, and utterly uninterested in anything beyond weather, wine, and the decor. They smiled at me when manners required, then turned back to their own conversations. Across the room, Ruth glided from guest to guest like she had rehearsed each step. Her laughter rang out at just the right pitch, her compliments flowing smoothly, her posture perfect. She had always been clever, but tonight she was something else calculated, polished, radiant in a way that seemed less about joy and more about performance. Jason stood beside her, tall and confident. His family's wealth had molded him into a man who believed his presence alone carried weight. He spoke with the ease of someone who had never worried about rent or groceries. Every word reinforced the image of strength and security. And then there was Pamela. Seated at the head table, draped in pearls and a gown that shimmered beneath the lights, she exuded authority without raising her voice. People leaned toward her as though approval from Pamela Miller was a currency of its own, and she doled it out sparingly, except when it came to Ruth. I saw the way Pamela's hand lingered on Ruth's arm, the approving nods, the soft smiles. It was the kind of warmth she had never once offered me. To her, I was invisible, useful only as a reminder of where Ruth had come from and where Pamela believed she should never return. I adjusted my napkin and tried to focus on the plate in front of me, seared salmon with truffle risotto, the kind of meal that cost more than my weekly grocery bill. My stomach turned as I pushed it around with my fork. A young man, Jason's cousin, I later remembered, leaned over and whispered, "Your daughter is remarkable, so practical, so down to earth." Jason couldn't have chosen better. Down to earth. I nearly laughed at the irony. If only he knew the conversation I had overheard on the terrace. If only he knew that Ruth had dismissed 30 years of my life at the public library as pathetic. I nodded politely, thanked him, and turned back to my untouched plate. Memories clawed at me as I sat there. Ruth as a little girl, her fingers fumbling across piano keys I had worked double shifts to pay for. Ruth as a teenager begging for summer camps so she could keep up with her wealthier classmates. Ruth in college, calling me in tears because she could not pay her rent. Every sacrifice I had made blurred together into one truth: I had given everything so she could have more. And now, she wore that history like an old coat she could not shed fast enough. During the father-daughter dance, the orchestra struck up "The Way You Look Tonight." It had been Ronald's favorite. My chest tightened as I watched Ruth twirl with Jason, her smile bright, her laughter light, as though her father's absence was nothing more than a missing chair. I had placed a framed photo of Ronald near the front, a quiet reminder of the man who had loved her unconditionally. She did not glance at it once. When the song ended, applause filled the room, but inside me there was only silence. The silence of a mother realizing she was losing her daughter not to death, but to ambition. I reached into my purse, feeling the letter's sharp edges against my hand. Ronald's words were my anchor. "Do not let her convince you that you are a burden." I straightened in my chair, letting my gaze travel across the room. Ruth's smile faltered for a fraction of a second when our eyes met, as though she sensed that something had shifted. Behind her radiant facade, I saw the calculation. Behind Pamela's polished approval, I saw control. Behind Jason's confidence, I saw entitlement. And behind my own quiet composure, I felt something rising, something stronger than humiliation, sharper than grief. Resolve. If Ruth thought I would disappear quietly, she had underestimated me. The morning after the wedding, I woke with the taste of bitterness still clinging to my mouth. Sleep had been shallow, broken by images of Ruth's gown glimmering under the chandeliers and Pamela's approving nods. I made coffee in my small kitchen, sat at the table with the envelope from Ronald beside me, and realized I could no longer pretend. I needed to know exactly what Ruth and Pamela had been planning. By mid-morning, I drove to the library. Not the mansion's showpiece, but the modest public library where I had spent decades of my life. It smelled of books and ink and faint dust, comforting, real, honest. My oldest friend, Margaret Davies, greeted me at the desk with her usual warmth. "Emma, I want to hear everything about the wedding," she said, hugging me. "It was extravagant," I managed. "But Margaret, I need your help." Her smile faded as she saw the seriousness in my eyes. "Tell me." I explained what I had overheard, what Ronald's letter revealed, and what Ruth had already suggested, a senior living facility with promises of comfort and safety. Margaret nodded gravely. "Let's see what we can find." For the next 2 hours we dug into public records, online reviews, and investigative reports. It did not take long before the glossy brochures Ruth had shown me unraveled into something darker. The facility was breathtakingly expensive, more than $150,000 a year for a private suite. But the real hook was its so-called asset protection program. Seniors could sign over their estate, sometimes worth several $1,000,000, in exchange for guaranteed lifetime care. On paper, it sounded secure. In reality, it reeked of exploitation. I scanned complaint after complaint. Families who felt pressured into quick decisions after losing a spouse, widows who regretted signing away their assets within weeks, adult children locked in lawsuits trying to recover what had been taken. Margaret handed me a stack of printed reports. "Look at this. The state investigated them twice in the past 5 years. Aggressive marketing practices, targeting vulnerable seniors, especially widows." My stomach turned. Ronald had seen this coming. He had warned me in that letter, begging me not to let Ruth push me into it. "It's not just about care," I said slowly, gripping the papers. "It's about control. If I sign over what Ronald left me, Ruth and Pamela won't just have peace of mind, they'll have my entire life in their hands." Margaret touched my arm. "Emma, you've always been practical. You've always managed on your own. You don't need them making choices for you." But the truth was heavier than that. Ronald's estate was not just a modest nest egg. Between insurance, investments, and savings, it totaled more than $5 million. Enough to tempt anyone who saw aging not as a season of life but as a liability to manage. I folded the papers into a neat stack. "Thank you, Margaret. I needed to see this with my own eyes." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I can't sit quietly and let them plan my future as if I'm already gone." As I walked back to my car, the autumn air felt sharper, colder. But for the first time since the wedding, I felt clarity. Ronald had left me more than money. He had left me the foresight to protect myself. Ruth thought she was maneuvering me into a corner. Pamela thought I was too small to resist. They were both wrong. I slid into the driver's seat, the papers heavy in my purse beside Ronald's letter, and whispered to myself, "I will not be erased." 2 weeks passed after the wedding before Ruth finally called me. Her voice on the phone was unusually sweet, syrupy in a way that set my nerves on edge. "Mom," she said, "Jason and I just got back from the honeymoon. We should have lunch. I want to catch up." It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. We met at a trendy bistro, the sort of place where the menu was written on chalkboards and the portions were so small they could fit on a saucer. Ruth arrived radiant, glowing from her trip, her skin tanned, her jewelry sparkling like she had stepped out of a magazine spread. She kissed my cheek lightly, as if checking off a duty. "You look tired," she said, her eyes scanning me. "Are you eating enough? Sleeping well?" "I manage," I replied. We ordered salads, though hers came adorned with imported cheeses and mine looked like it had been plucked from a rabbit's garden. I listened as she spoke about Italy, the villas, the wine, the art. She described Jason's family vacation home, the charity boards Pamela was helping her join, the events she had already been introduced to. It was a life built for display, perfectly curated for admiration. When the coffee arrived, she leaned forward, her tone shifting. "Mom, Jason and I have been talking. We're concerned about your future." There it was. "You're in that little apartment all alone," she continued, her voice soft and concerned. "The neighborhood isn't getting safer. And honestly, it's not fair for you to have to worry about things at your age." I set my cup down carefully. "I've been fine." "Of course you have," Ruth said quickly. "But it's about planning ahead. You deserve peace of mind, security, social activities with people your age, medical services nearby. That's why we've been looking into an exclusive senior community, very safe, very reputable." I felt the words tightening around me like a noose. She reached across the table, placing her manicured hand on mine. "The best part is, you wouldn't have to worry about finances anymore." They have a program where you transfer your assets, and in exchange, they guarantee care for life. I pulled my hand back. Transfer my assets? Yes, she said, her smile a little too bright. It's standard. It protects everyone. You'll never have to think about bills again. I stared at her, remembering the brochures Ronald had described in his letter, the complaints Margaret and I had printed, the investigations. That's thoughtful, I said slowly, forcing calm into my voice, but I'm not ready to make that kind of decision. Ruth's smile tightened. Mom, I understand it's hard to admit when you might need help, but Dad's been gone for 3 years. You can't keep pretending you'll manage everything alone forever. Her words stung. I'm not pretending. I am managing. Her voice sharpened. Are you? You've missed appointments. You forget to return calls. Patricia even mentioned you seemed confused at the wedding. I felt my jaw clench. Confused. That's what they were calling it. I seemed confused, I said evenly, because I overheard you tell Pamela I was a pathetic failure. That tends to disorient someone. Her eyes widened. For a moment her mask slipped. I never said that, she whispered. Yes, Ruth, you did. She straightened, her face hardening. You took it out of context. I was just reassuring her that you weren't going to be demanding, that you knew your place. My place. I let silence stretch between us, until even the clinking of dishes from nearby tables seemed deafening. Finally, I gathered my purse. Ruth, I said quietly, I've been taking care of myself for 70 years. I raised you. I supported your father through cancer. I managed a household and worked every day of my life. Why do you suddenly think I'm incapable? Her eyes flickered, a mixture of fear and frustration, because one day you won't be capable, and I can't let that destroy everything I've built. For the first time, I saw not confidence but panic in her expression. She wasn't offering me security, she was offering herself relief. I stood, placing enough cash on the table to cover my salad. When the day comes that I need help, Ruth, I'll decide how to handle it. Not you, not Pamela, and certainly not a facility that sees me as a walking bank account. Her lips parted, but no words came. I walked out into the sunlight, my pulse pounding. Ronald had been right. Ruth wasn't worried about me. She was worried about her inheritance, about how my independence threatened the perfect life she was building. And now, she knew that I knew. A month later, Ruth called again. Her tone was clipped, rehearsed, as if every word had been chosen with care. Mom, Jason and I want to talk. Tonight, at our house. It's important. The words carried weight. I knew what was coming. That evening I drove to their sprawling home, its manicured lawn glowing under carefully placed lights. Inside, the living room looked staged, every pillow arranged, every candle lit. Ruth and Jason sat on the sofa, Pamela poised beside them like a judge presiding over a trial. A single chair waited for me across from them. The setup was deliberate. Emma, Pamela began, her voice smooth but firm, we've noticed some troubling signs lately. Forgetfulness, missed calls, difficulty keeping up with responsibilities. Ruth nodded solemnly. Mom, it's nothing to be ashamed of. These things happen with age. Jason leaned forward, his expression heavy with false concern. We think you might be showing early cognitive changes. It's best to act before it becomes dangerous. I listened, my face calm though my pulse quickened. Their script was flawless, designed to corner me with concern disguised as love. Pamela reached for a folder on the coffee table and slid it toward me. We've arranged a placement at an exclusive senior community. They have an opening next week. All we need is your signature. Inside the folder lay a stack of papers, power of attorney forms, asset transfer agreements, health directives. Every line neatly prepared, every page waiting for me to surrender. I lifted the folder slowly, then set it back on the table. Quite a production, I said evenly. How long have you been rehearsing this? Ruth flinched. Mom, this isn't a performance. We're genuinely worried. Are you? I asked. My hand slipped into my purse and pulled out the envelope. The paper was worn now, the edges softened by time. I unfolded it carefully. Because I have something Ronald wanted you to hear. Ruth's face drained of color. Pamela stiffened, her lips pressing into a line. Jason looked confused but leaned back to listen. I began to read aloud. Ronald's voice filled the room through the words he had left behind, Ruth questioning our finances, pressing him about the will, presenting brochures from a facility that demanded asset transfers. His warnings that she was planning something, his vow to protect me by leaving everything in my name, his plea, "Do not let her put you there, Emma." Each word landed heavy. Ruth's mask cracked, panic flickering in her eyes. Jason shifted uncomfortably, staring at her. Pamela's hands clenched in her lap, though her face remained composed. When I finished, silence swallowed the room. Jason broke it first. "Ruth, is this true? Did you really bring Dad brochures while he was dying?" Ruth stammered. "I was planning ahead." "Planning?" Jason's voice hardened. "While your father was still alive?" Pamela cut in smoothly. "Michael." But Jason raised a hand. "No, I want to hear her answer." Ruth's lips trembled, her voice sharp with desperation. "I was trying to protect her. I didn't want to be stuck handling everything when she declines. I thought—" "You thought," I interrupted softly, "that I was already fading. That I was a problem to be solved." Pamela tried again. "Emma, let's not relive the past. What matters is your safety now." I turned to her, my voice steady. "What matters is truth. And the truth is, you recommended a facility investigated twice for preying on widows. You wanted me silenced, Pamela. You wanted me stored away." Her composure wavered for the first time. I gathered the papers from the table and stacked them neatly. "I will not sign these. I will not surrender my life, my choices, or the legacy Ronald entrusted to me." I rose from the chair, purse in hand. Ruth's voice followed, trembling. "Mom, wait." But I had already made my choice. For 70 years I had been quiet, compliant, willing to sacrifice. Not anymore. That night, as I drove away, the letter safe beside me, I realized something important. They had staged an intervention to strip me of control. Instead, Ronald's words had given me the strength to reclaim it. The drive home from Ruth's house was silent except for the hum of my tires on the road. Ronald's letter sat on the passenger seat, as if his spirit were riding with me, reminding me that truth had been spoken. Yet I knew the battle wasn't finished. Families like Pamela's didn't surrender easily. 3 days later, Jason called. His voice was strained, uncertain. "Emma," he said, "can we meet? Just you and me." I hesitated, but agreed. We met at a quiet cafe, far from Pamela's reach. Jason looked tired, shadows under his eyes, his usual polished confidence gone. "I didn't know," he admitted. "About Ruth, about those brochures, about the way she pushed your father." He ran a hand through his hair. "I thought this was about keeping you safe. But after hearing that letter, after seeing those complaints about the facility, Emma, it doesn't feel right." I sipped my coffee slowly, letting him wrestle with the truth. "Your wife was ready to hand me over like an old ledger to be closed. And your mother encouraged it." Jason's jaw tightened. "My mother, she believes in appearances above all else. If someone is inconvenient, you move them out of sight." "And Ruth has learned that lesson well," I replied. His shoulders slumped. "She's scared, you know, terrified of becoming responsible for you. But that doesn't excuse it." For the first time, I saw him not as the confident heir, but as a man caught between loyalty to his wife and awareness of her betrayal. The cracks in the facade were widening. Later that week, Ruth arrived at my apartment. She didn't knock gently, she banged on the door until I opened it. Her eyes were red, her voice sharp. "How could you humiliate me like that?" she demanded. "Reading Dad's letter in front of Jason and Pamela? Do you know what that did to my marriage?" I met her glare with calm. "Do you know what it did to me when you called me a pathetic failure on your wedding day?" She froze, then looked away. "Mom," she whispered, her tone shifting from anger to something raw. "I'm scared. I don't know how to take care of you if something happens. I don't want to lose everything Jason and I are building." Her honesty caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw not the polished social climber, but the frightened girl who once cried in my arms after her first heartbreak. "Ruth," I said gently, "help doesn't mean control. Help means asking me what I want, respecting my choices, not shoving me into a place that sees seniors as revenue streams." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," I interrupted softly, "but meaning can change, if you're brave enough to face it." The tension broke. Ruth sat down heavily on my sofa, covering her face with her hands. For the first time in years, she looked like a daughter seeking comfort rather than a woman chasing status. The next evening, Jason called again. His voice was firmer now. "Emma, I told Ruth I won't support any plan that strips you of your independence. She needs to understand that. And so does my mother." Pamela, of course, did not take it well. Word reached me through Ruth that Pamela accused me of manipulating the family, of staging drama to embarrass them. But Pamela's composure was cracking too. Her influence wasn't absolute anymore. I felt the tide turning. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But for the first time, Ruth and Jason were no longer united against me, and Pamela was on uncertain ground. As I sat alone that night, Ronald's letter beside me on the table, I whispered, "We're getting there, love. The truth is finally breaking through." 6 months later, life looked very different. The tension of that night in Ruth's living room had not vanished overnight, but something had shifted. Jason kept his word. He refused to back any plan that involved stripping me of my independence. Pamela tried, of course. She called, sent letters, suggested alternatives. Each time, Jason cut her short. It was the first crack I'd ever seen in Pamela's armor, and though she pretended otherwise, she knew her influence was slipping. Ruth, meanwhile, surprised me. She started therapy. At first, she resisted, blaming Jason, blaming me, even blaming Ronald's letter. But slowly, she began to see what she had done. One afternoon, she invited me to a cafe near the library. She sat across from me, hands wrapped around a cup she barely touched. "Mom," she said, "I've been thinking about what you told me, about respect, about choices. My therapist says I treated you like a problem to manage instead of a person. She's right." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I'm sorry." For the first time in years, her words sounded unpolished, uncalculated. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I don't need perfection, Ruth. I just need honesty, and a daughter who sees me as more than an obstacle." She nodded, her lips trembling. Our relationship wasn't magically repaired, but it was real again. That mattered more than flawless family photos. During those months, I also found something I hadn't expected: companionship. George Davis, a retired literature professor I met at a library lecture, asked if I'd like to attend a concert with him. One evening became two, and soon it became a quiet rhythm coffee after book club, strolls through the park, long conversations about poetry and history. He was kind, thoughtful, and most importantly, he treated me as a capable woman, not a fragile relic. When Ruth learned about him, her reaction surprised me. Instead of disdain, she smiled softly. "I'm glad you have someone, Mom. You deserve that." I nearly cried at her words. As the months rolled on, I noticed something else. Ruth began calling me weekly, not to interrogate or to push me, but simply to talk. She asked about the book I was reading, whether I'd gone to the community center's events, how George and I were spending our weekends. For once, she was interested in my happiness, not my compliance. Even Jason reached out. One evening he phoned directly. "Emma, I wanted to apologize again. I let things go too far. I trusted my mother's judgment when I should have trusted my own eyes. Ruth and I have agreed any future decisions about family will include you as an equal. That's how it should be." I thanked him. Though I still carried scars, I knew change was possible. Pamela, predictably, never apologized. She adjusted her strategy instead. At gatherings, she now treated me with the cordial respect one offers to an equal adversary. It wasn't affection, but I didn't need affection from her. Respect was enough. A year after the wedding, Ruth surprised me with another gesture. "Mom," she said over lunch, "Jason and I are planning a family trip to Europe next spring. We want you to come with us, as a guest, not an obligation. You'll have your independence, plenty of time to explore on your own, but we'd love to share some of it with you." The offer stunned me. I had dreamed of traveling for decades but never had the chance. Ronald and I always promised someday. Now, someday had arrived. As I began packing months later, folding sweaters into my suitcase, I thought of Ronald. His letter had saved me. Not because it exposed Ruth's schemes, but because it reminded me of my worth. For too long I had let others decide how visible I could be, how much space I deserved to occupy. No longer. When Ruth came by with pastries and asked, "Are you excited?" I smiled, nervous and excited, but ready. She hugged me tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom." I whispered back. "Thank you for finding your way back." The next morning, as I closed my suitcase, I glanced at Ronald's photo on the shelf. "You'd be proud," I murmured. Not just of me, not just of Ruth, but of the legacy we had built together, a reminder that dignity, once defended, can never truly be taken away.